Alright, everyone. We're back. Now I'm going to be doing something a little bit different on Hunger Games Simulator. I'm going to be playing as the Arthur's Birthday Game characters. But not only them, but also going to be playing as the Arthur's Birthday Living Books and Lilo and Stitch characters on Hunger Games Simulator. Are you ready? Shall we begin? Yes, we shall. Here we go.
As the tributes stand on their podiums, the horn sounds. Francine runs away from the cornucopia. Aunt Bonnie and Stitch fight party store Lady and Arthur. Aunt Bonnie and Stitch survive. Father grabs a backpack, not realizing it is empty. Prunella finds a bow, some arrows, and a quiver. Plinkly, Nanny, DW, and Jumba share everything they gathered before running. Binky gathers as much food as he can. Sue Ellen, Buster, Brain, and Mother share everything they gathered before running. Cousin George runs away from the cornucopia. Donkey retrieves a trident from inside the cornucopia. Cobra Bubbles runs away from the cornucopia. Muffy, David, and Fern work together to get as many supplies as possible. Grandma Thora grabs a sword. Lilo runs away from the cornucopia. Aunt Bonnie receives fresh food from an unknown sponsor. Sue Ellen questions her sanity. Nanny practices her archery. Stitch receives fresh food from an unknown sponsor. Francine tries to sleep through the entire day. Mother searches for firewood. Muffy sprains her ankle while running away from Father. David makes a slingshot. Brain travels to higher ground. Buster collects fruit from a tree. Lilo practices her archery. DW receives fresh food from an unknown sponsor. Prunella attacks Jumba, but he manages to escape. Donkey questions his sanity. Cousin George receives clean water from an unknown sponsor. Binky, Grandma Thora, Cobra Bubbles, and Fern hunt for other tributes. Plinkly receives an explosive from an unknown sponsor. Brain lets Fern into his shelter. Plinkly and Stitch talk about the tributes still alive. Mother begs for Muffy to kill her. She refuses, keeping Mother alive. Aunt Bonnie receives fresh food from an unknown sponsor. Jumba is unable to start a fire and sleeps without warmth. Lilo receives clean water from an unknown sponsor. Francine, Prunella, and DW sleep in shifts. David cries himself to sleep. Donkey and Father talk about the tributes still alive. Cobra Bubbles and Grandma Thora talk about the tributes still alive. Buster fends Cousin George, Binky, and Sue Ellen away from his fire. Nanny sets up camp for the night. Muffy receives medical supplies from an unknown sponsor. Nanny receives clean water from an unknown sponsor. Prunella discovers a cave. Grandma Thora, Francine, Donkey, and DW hunt for other tributes. Sue Ellen kills Cobra Bubbles with his own weapon. Lilo, Buster, Stitch, and Father raid Binky's camp while he is hunting. Jumba thinks about home. Plinkly collects fruit from a tree. David fishes. Fern makes a slingshot. Aunt Bonnie chases Brain. Mother constructs a shack. Cousin George tries to sleep through the entire day. Francine fends Binky, Stitch, and Lilo away from her fire. DW, Brain, Prunella, and Nanny sleep in shifts. Father and Muffy tell stories about themselves to each other. Cousin George begs for Aunt Bonnie to kill him. She refuses, keeping Cousin George alive. Mother tends to her wounds. Sue Ellen sets up camp for the night. Donkey accidentally detonates a landmine while trying to arm it. Plinkly loses sight of where he is. Fern receives an explosive from an unknown sponsor. Jumba begs for Grandma Thora to kill him. She refuses, keeping Jumba alive. David sets Buster on fire with a Molotov. Aunt Bonnie, Prunella, Binky, Father, and Lilo track down and kill Grandma Thora. Mother and Fern work together for the day. Nanny sets Jumba on fire with a Molotov. Francine and Cousin George hunt for other tributes. Muffy explores the arena. Stitch receives a hatchet from an unknown sponsor. DW, Plinkly, and Brain get into a fight. Plinkly triumphantly kills them both. Sue Ellen discovers a cave. David collects fruit from a tree. Mother, Nanny, and Lilo sleep in shifts. Muffy passes out from exhaustion. Fern looks at the night sky. Sue Ellen passes out from exhaustion. Stitch sees a fire, but stays hidden. Father attempts to start a fire, but is unsuccessful. Francine quietly hums. David receives medical supplies from an unknown sponsor. Cousin George, Pleakley, and Aunt Bonnie sleep in shifts. Binky is awoken by nightmares. Prunella climbs a tree to rest. Muffy discovers a cave. Mother tends to David's wounds. Stitch tries to spear fish with a trident. Father discovers a cave. Lilo receives medical supplies from an unknown sponsor. Binky strangles Cousin George after engaging in a fist fight. Pleakley hunts for other tributes. Aunt Bonnie bashes Nanny's head against a rock several times. Sue Ellen falls into a pit and dies. Francine tends to Fern's wounds. Prunella receives clean water from an unknown sponsor. Mother cannot handle the circumstances and commits suicide. Muffy, Pleakley, and Aunt Bonnie cheerfully sing songs together. Father tends to Prunella's wounds. Stitch tries to sing himself to sleep. Fern tries to treat her infection. David tends to Lilo's wounds. Francine tries to sing herself to sleep. Binky attempts to start a fire, but is unsuccessful. Muffy diverts David's attention and runs away. Fern discovers a cave. Father falls into a frozen lake and drowns. Francine thinks about home. Pleakley makes a slingshot. Lilo, Stitch, Binky, and Prunella hunt for other tributes. Aunt Bonnie sees smoke rising in the distance, but decides not to investigate. Fern is unable to start a fire and sleeps without warmth. Aunt Bonnie thinks about home. David kills Muffy with a hatchet. Lilo, Francine, and Pleakley sleep in shifts. Stitch tries to treat his infection. Binky and Prunella tell stories about themselves to each other. The cornucopia is replenished with food, supplies, weapons, and memoirs from the tribute's families. Aunt Bonnie decides not to go to the feast. Fern decides not to go to the feast. Binky shoots an arrow at Francine, but misses and kills Prunella instead. Stitch decides not to go to the feast. David kills Pleakley with a sickle. Lilo decides not to go to the feast. Lilo makes a wooden spear. Francine and Stitch split up to search for resources. David discovers a cave. Fern begs for Binky to kill her. He refuses, keeping Fern alive. Aunt Bonnie receives medical supplies from an unknown sponsor. Fern dies from hunger. Francine, Aunt Bonnie, Stitch, and Lilo tell each other ghost stories to lighten the mood. David receives a hatchet from an unknown sponsor. Binky looks at the night sky. Francine goes hunting. David questions his sanity. Lilo receives a hatchet from an unknown sponsor. Binky makes a slingshot. Stitch receives medical supplies from an unknown sponsor. Aunt Bonnie receives a hatchet from an unknown sponsor. The arena turns pitch black and nobody can see a thing. Lilo survives. Aunt Bonnie survives. While fighting, David and Stitch lose their balance, roll down a jagged hillside, and die. Binky trips on a rock and falls off a cliff. Francine survives.
Yes!
Francine loses sight of where she is. Aunt Bonnie spears Lilo in the abdomen. Aunt Bonnie pushes Francine off a cliff during a knife fight. The winner is Aunt Bonnie from District 3.
And there you have it. Hey, see you for my next video, everyone.